Hey guys, I'm gonna get into one of my all-time favorite films, No Country for Old Men. It's most certainly, I believe, the Coen Brothers' masterpiece. Although they have a lot of masterpieces, and a lot of them do come extremely close to quality, but I think this one wins out for having directing that is just so ahead of its time that it actually makes me think a lot of like films like 2001: A Space Odyssey, where you're just kind of always in a drift with what's everything that's going on. Everything's very subtle, and it's like the story is being told more by way of the visuals than by way of the dialogue, and that's a very different place. And there's not even a soundtrack behind this film, which makes this a very original kind of impact. This film has always been felt like it's a little ahead of me. Like I first saw this and I didn't even really get it exactly because it's just so different than how any other horror film before or thriller. It feels like a horror film, although it's not technically. It feels like this is like a forward-thinking foundation of what films like Alien, Silence of the Lambs are kind of doing, which is just kind of like this cat and mouse kind of like sort of like horror undertone. But at the same time, there's like I think this film advances like the way of directing better. And those two films are also genius masterpieces. But this kind of takes like a lot of the technique of Alien and a lot of the thrill of science fiction and something even further, which is just ultimately being defeated by evil, which is kind of I think what makes this so rewatchable. Like every time I rewatch this, it does kind of feel like it's just kind of taking you through a desert where every person is ultimately spiritually lonely. And I think that's a theme I'm catching up to in my 30s, moving for the rest of my life. It's more like the loneliness is different than like what's depicted in films like Taxi Driver. Here, it's more of a spiritual loneliness. Every character is like they have each other sort of in one way or another. And because I feel like what I mean by that is this kind of has a bit of a good, bad, and ugly kind of formula. And the good is trouble ultimately in this kind of scenario. This is like an anti-good, the bad, the ugly in a sense. The good is trouble. And that's Tommy Lee Jones' character because it's like what I mean by he has something. He has like he's married and everything. Like he's got like this full life, but he looks around him in his job and he literally just feels depressed about everything. So he's just on a very depressed wavelength consistently. Um, and the bad is most certainly Anton Chigurh, who is easily, and it's almost like sad to him, but he's easily like the smartest and coolest character in the film. And I think that's what makes this really advanced. This is like a case where literally the evil man just happens to have a greater sense of intelligence and he's extremely calculated, but he's really a genius in his own right of being a bad person, literally, because he dominates everyone who's in his space. Except for moments with the ugly, which is played by Llewellyn Moss. I mean, that's a great character. I love him because he's again sort of like that. Like it's like every trait about him, it can be like holes there, but ultimately you root for him. He's a good guy, But in a sense, like the way he fights to the death, but he's also like a little crazy in his own way too. But at the same time, whenever he's in the face of evil, he's just really cocky and he wants to just basically be above evil, which just and then whenever he's in the face, and that's the thing, it's just like these characters are just like symbols of metaphors or just something like a bit of a modern anti-good, bad, and ugly sort of mystique. Which makes this just a modern masterpiece. And again, I think this film particularly foreshadows how many of the best films are directed onwards, which is just that kind of subtle melancholic mood of just like let the visuals kind of do the talking, the color schemes rather than just the voice. I mean, because I think that's what makes film such a unique essence that's different from reading a novel. I mean, reading a novel leaves it up entirely to your imagination, but by film, you're getting a unique sense of immersing right into the color scheme. So I've been asked that question. It's like, and I ask that question a lot when I'm making the film I'm making now. It's like, why am I doing this as opposed to typing it into a novel? And it's because I think in my heart, and just like how the directors are, it's like you want it to be like the characters. You want it to be about everything that's around the character and their headspace in a lot of ways. And I think that the Coen brothers are absolute geniuses at doing this. Again, I know they're heavily influenced by Stanley Kubrick films. They're like a more fast-paced Stanley Kubrick. It's like if they just wanted to have a lot more dialogue typically. But this film is about as slow pace as a Stanley Kubrick film, so it's different. Anton Chigurh is really one of the best villains of all time because he kind of makes this the ultimate thriller. Because all the other characters are just amazing in this film. I mean, again, like the good is very cynical in this, and I think that the tone, again, and then the title "No Country for Old Men" certainly refers to him. Although the majority of the film revolves around its subplot, which is the whole cat and mouse sequence of Moss discovering money, and then Anton basically being after the money and after this man who's got his money. So it's just like a really intense depiction of just heart-wrenching suspense to the point where it feels horrific, literally. And it's a really original kind of atmosphere it conveys. Again, no soundtrack. It's just silence talking, basically. And it kind of has a character formula And the Coen brothers used this kind of good, bad, ugly formula a few times. I mean, Fargo had this as well, but of course, this is adapted from a novel, from a McCarthy novel. And I've read the book too, and I love the book, but love this film even more because this literally is like a further evolution of, I think, the foundation the book is laying out. And I think that the way that this is advanced in the way that it's filmed in so many different leagues, and it's endlessly influential as far as its take on just. It's like a melancholic thriller, I think, horror thriller, you could say in tone. That's basically what it feels like. Um, Anton Chigurh is a genius because, in a way, because he literally is so evil, and that's the way it goes sometimes. Sometimes the evil ones are the ones genius too. So it's like just as much as the good. I realize it's like that's the kind of the fear that comes along the way. You can fall for genius from evil people just as much as great people. That's kind of what happens when you get deep into the depths of art. So it's like kind of interesting to step back and really perceive that in itself. But Anton's a walking representation of, like, again, all these gunfight sequences that him and Llewellyn Moss getting into. It feels horrifying rather than exciting in like a lot in action sense. This is just kind of like, oh crap! Like the gunshots feel very intense and realistic. And then you have, of course, like Orson Welles played by Woody Harrelson. That's a really unique kind of character because he just kind of comes out of nowhere, honestly. And I mean, everyone here is just amazing. I really love Javier Bardem in this. All the actors are cynical, but they're perfect in their own kind of way because they're just like the coolest characters ever. I mean, I also love, other side characters like Carla Jean Moss. That's Llewellyn Moss's wife. She's really cool. I really like her character an awful lot. Kelly MacDonald plays her. It's my favorite character she's played. And then the Coen brothers are just really unique at portraying such a picture here and a feeling that anything could go wrong at any given moment. I mean, this is one of the best films of all time. It really is, and I highly recommend this film literally to everybody because it's very engaging the entire way through. All the cinematography is just so beautiful. All the actors are perfect. All the dialogue, and it's honestly, it's minimal in its writing. The dialogue is quite perfect because, he's probably the most serious film the Coen brothers honestly made. I mean, even the serious means it's funny. But this is actually a pretty deep depth of serious because it's actually just getting into the raw, gritty depths of just like an urban Texas kind of atmosphere. It's really original the way the beauty of these landscapes are captured along with the madness of man, but it's more focused on like a cynical edge because ultimately the film is kind of in the tone of Tommy Lee Jones, like and Tom Bell, because that Tom Bell sort of has this outlook that just, well, like he never finds God, basically, is what he kind of says, and that's the way that some people live, and I think to know that and to see that in its own way, and it's like, and because you have to come to an understanding of why. It's because Anton Chigurh exists. A man like that exists, and that's like the definition of why he's like this. So, then you have in the good, it's just like, or not the good, but Llewellyn Moss, the ugly. He's just kind of like trying to be above evil, and of course, evil dominates. He's naive in it. That's the thing. He's really not bad. He's just naive, I think, ultimately. It's a naive man who gets himself way too over his head over this money deal. Because it's a naive man who just becomes a millionaire. Yeah, he's going to fight for that. But again, it's terrifying. And it feels like as the years pass, this film is better. This film ages like fine wine. Because the Coen brothers are kind of just masterfully putting something on the big screen that just really captures just something that's just kind of pessimistic in tone. That's why I don't think I loved it the first time I saw it. I think I had to grow to acquire to a pessimistic outlook, like a lot of days, like Radiohead kind of taught me in a lot of ways. But it comes better in a film sense, I believe, in the end for me, because it's like just, I mean, I really love that tone in the film and the way that just raw anxiety is captured in No Country for Old Men. Like it really is just a perfect thriller, and I mean all the atmosphere here is just like it really portrays beauty in the nature. But I mean, even then, I mean this is a perfect film that certainly feels like a foundation on the suspenseful layers that Alfred Hitchcock was going through. And so it's like Melville, it's amazing. I mean, like it's a cautionary tale, the best kind of sense, and it's very unpredictable the entire way through. And that's honestly, at the end of the day, the best feeling ever when I'm watching a film. A feeling of unpredictability and layered suspense of like anything could happen at any moment. I'm on a carnival ride and anything could happen. And it just makes you in a meditative trance like a lot of the best films do. The film is ultimately striving for a meditative sort of tone. And I love this film so much. I mean, it really is amazing to me. Because I watched this and I expected it to be polarizing too. I'm so amazed it's like one Best Picture. As much as I love There Will Be Blood equally, perhaps that one hits me a little closer to home in the end of the day. Maybe like by a smidge. But these are both my top 20, so I'm like, this is literally one of the best films of all time because it's just so real in its existentialism and the way that the Coen brothers could just combine everything going on in society, like in just kind of in a personal lives kind of way, and just the stresses, in a lot of ways, how the stresses can literally overbear a person to the point of he just feels like death into the end. He already feels like he's dead because literally death is dominating force in his character. That's the thing. He's always an enigma, and that's the horrific thing. I think that a lot of films have kind of built up to. It's that evil is as dominating as good. That's pretty terrifying realization to have, but it's also necessary in a lot of ways because you kind of just see when you have a lack of heroes in a world, there is a hopelessness and a feeling that there needs to be something. And that's inside whenever I watch this film. And I love how it could tap into that mood so specifically. Like it's like looking at Satan on Earth and not having too much of a God force around because like Tommy Lee Jones is probably the closest to a godly man, but he is just defeated and he just isn't motivated to do it anymore because the world's too ugly and the world is too awful, so hence the title. I mean, it's just amazing that this film comes to life and it's the best shots. This is perfectly executed by the cinematography. I mean, he's really a genius cinematographer, like Roger Deakins, that is. Yeah, it's great. I'm obsessed with Roger Deakins' work in a modern sense of how he kind of brings his visions to life for the directors. And that is all-time best movies with the Coen brothers, and this is just one of the best of all time. And then it's just the thing. It's like the Coen brothers haven't really made an extremely interesting film ever since Oh Brother Where Art Thou, or The Man Who Wasn't Here. It's very underrated, I think. But the Coen brothers took about 5 years, I think, really building up to making this kind of masterpiece because this is different from the stuff they made in the 90s. Like in the 90s, they had a little bit more of a goofball kind of attitude towards life. But I think the Coen brothers here just got completely serious with what they're doing, and it's honestly like they're like, and they almost are just as good as what they are like in their most original moments, like Fargo, Big Lebowski, Barton Fink. It's like just as perfect here. Like it's just completely serious. And again, and that's a tone that builds up even further to Inside Llewyn Davis, which I'm excited. That's an equally perfect film to me because that's the best Coen brothers summation of just characters who are ultimately feeling warm and bleak at the exact same time. And the balance that's found in the middle of that, the cozy balance. No Country for Old Men's a lot darker. This is a dark film. It's very intense, quite violent. Oh, its depiction of violence is horrifying, I should say. That's a very modern kind of modern form of nihilistic violence. And I mean, the plot itself is just really engaging because it's really simple in its execution. Literally, it's just man finds money, guys after him, and the old man's so depressed about it that there's just no past the point of return. So, I mean, it's one of the most entertaining films ever made. I mean, it really is. That's the thing about it. With all this around it, it's just like it's really unpretentious in the way that it's directed. I think I love that about him, and I know debatably Stand on the Cure, but I think this further is just very unpretentious because it's just simply in the moment of like an engagement, just an action going on at all times. I mean, yeah, it's absolutely a modern masterpiece. It gets better every time I rewatch it, every time I think about it. This has a feeling to it that's so intense that I'm just literally on the edge of my seat like the entire way through. I mean, it's always entertaining. And this film, actually, whenever I pause it, I'm always looking around, waiting for Javier Bardem to come around because he's evil and dominating in every single kind of way. Like this is a really original film at portraying this kind of thing. I love this film dearly. It's absolutely perfect at what it's doing, and I think that it is a modern masterpiece. It literally just did kind of pave the way. I think in a way like I'm certainly kind of looking at too. It's like this feeling of just let the moment happen. And keep it simple. Ultimately, this big scope, this big story of what you're doing. There's like a best way of just keeping it really, really simple, and that's definitely what the Coen brothers were out to do with this film. So, it comes highly recommended to anybody. If you're up for the extent of violence it's portraying, I mean, this is a very raw depiction on the same depths of, Taxi Driver. Like that's a really intense, place to be. So. No Country for Old Men is kind of, I think, another end that reminds me a lot of the film, sometimes Taxi Driver. Sometimes I kind of come back to this, and these days I slightly prefer this film because it actually hits me in a way that's just kind of more timeless than that. Because, I mean, I think the difference is Travis Bickle is young. He's 26, and I believe. And then here, okay, like this is happening to a man who's like in his 70s and his 80s. And somehow that's more meaningful to me to kind of go through that right at this point because literally this is almost like a worn out man, but he's not crazy. Like he feels like going crazy, but he kind of keeps his sanity. That's what I really love about Tommy Lee Jones' character in this film. He's easily his best moment. I mean, I grew up miscellaneously seeing a lot of Tommy Lee Jones, and yeah, he kind of has like a dad presence to him I kind of like. But here he's just at his most serious and just kind of seeing nothing worth living for anymore. But he still has a way of keep on keeping on. But of course, he's kind of doing this really intense job, you know. So the man's not just he's not exactly a peaceful man, you know, in that way. But at the same time, you kind of see all this in, you know, like Elon Musk, like he's just this cocky guy who sees like evil and his money. He's like, no, I'm gonna rise right above it to the death, basically. Which yeah, and I mean it's extremely unfortunate. Like it's really tragic. Like it's tragic naivete. I'm learning that's a theme. I think that I'm really expanding on tragic naivete. I think that's one that fits perfectly. And No Country for Old Men captures that by this character and how it leads to his ultimate downfall completely. So. I mean, it's crazy how all that happens, and then it's just again, Javier Bardem. I mean, he's terrifying. Like unstoppable force of evil is the way that he's meant to be portrayed. It's like literally things hit him, bullets. He gets shot all the time. It's like okay, it doesn't even kill him. Literally, like it's crazy. I think he's intended to, and it's not cheesy the way it's executed, like it may seem. This man's just literally like a Terminator-like figure, and that's what it feels like—an evil Terminator in human form. But this man's completely human. He's intended to be completely human. And that's like the way Cormac McCarthy wrote this. And, exactly the way Killen's depicted. It's that, I mean, he's just kind of his own. He's kind of just his own man altogether, and he's just a man who happens to be in tune with some serious Satan. He is like a walking force of Satan. He's like Satan possessed a human completely. Yeah, he's a walking intense, crazy zombie, scary guy. So that's him. And honestly, all those nature shots in this film are perfect. Like it really does kind of capture this atmosphere perfectly. Just being on the desert, just all these long takes of just the vast landscapes are just really what make this film timeless because it's just told so perfectly. I think in a way that's perhaps even more subtle as than any Terrence Malick films, which I love that joke really good. Because here it's just literally no sentimentality whatsoever. And Terrence Malick had good sentimentality, but I think the Coens have no sentimentality with their portrayal, the equally beautiful portrayal of nature because it's just. Look how insane man is going. So that's No Country for Old Men. I recommend this film to anybody who's up for a very intense depiction of violence. It's a perfect masterpiece.